It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight, continuing to follow the developing crisis in the Middle East. Tonight, Gaza is plunged into darkness, under siege and out of electricity. The tiny enclave's power station has gone offline, leaving hospitals to run on generators. Tonight, I'm going to speak to a British Palestinian woman whose brother is stuck in Gaza. Among the dead after Hamas attack on Israel is Jake Marlowe, a British man who was working as a security guard at the Nova Music Festival. Buckingham Palace has issued its first words on behalf of the King 4 days after this war began. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock will be here in the studio with me. Also, after his glittering outing at the Labour Party conference yesterday, Sir Keir Starmer has been telling Sky News that even Rishi Sunak thinks the Conservatives will lose the next general election. Luton Airport gets back to business after this huge fire in its car park last night. 4 firefighters and a member of airport staff were injured. 1,200 cars are believed to have been damaged. We're going to tell you about the eager beavers back in London for the first time in 400 years as a family are rewilded to improve biodiversity. And I'm going to speak to the coach of a Welsh junior football team to find out how they ended up being sponsored by 50 Cent. All of that and much more to come on the UK Tonight. Well, there really has been no let-up in the fighting after Hamas' surprise attack on Israel at the weekend, and it now seems all but inevitable that the Israeli army will soon launch a ground offensive in Gaza. Officials there are warning of a deepening humanitarian crisis as the bombardments continue. The tiny enclave's only power station has gone offline, which means hospitals who are treating thousands of people injured in airstrikes are now relying on generators. The Palestinian Health Authority says 1,100 people have been killed in Gaza. In Israel, 1,200 people are now known to have died in the Hamas attacks that began on Saturday. Our correspondent Ashish Joshi has our main report tonight.
Exploding just feet away from the entrance of a hotel used by media and international aid organizations. This video captures the full power and force of Israeli bombs being dropped on Gaza. The onslaught is relentless. Israel has vowed the strongest possible response to the Hamas attacks, and thousands of its bombs have rained down on Gaza, reducing neighborhoods to this. Gaza's health ministry says 2/3 of the bomb's victims are women and children.
There are moments that kind of take your breath away. You kind of feel winded when you see a beautiful young girl, the braids, the elastic hairband, the pink elastic hairband, as you're trying to clean the face and in your mind, go through your mind, just what are the steps you're going to need to do to try to put this back together again. And then you see this and you're reminded that this was someone's baby child.
Israel says it is striking key Hamas targets and warns civilians in Gaza to move.
We are actually calling the population in Gaza to move out, get away from Hamas headquarters, move away from Hamas militants. We don't want to hurt any civilians, but if you will stay around those barbaric terrorists, you will get hurt.
But as Israel wages war against Hamas, the threat to its own citizens has not gone away. These terrified Israelis, shielding from Hamas rockets, fired into southern Israel. The country's Iron Dome defense system intercepting many, but not all of the missiles. Britain's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly was forced to run for cover on a visit to southern Israel when sirens warned of an imminent attack.
When a good friend, as Israel is to the United Kingdom, experiences a terrible situation like this, it is important that your friends around the world show solidarity and demonstrate support.
The horror for Israelis is raw. Each day, more harrowing accounts of the Hamas terror are shared by survivors of the weekend's carnage.
I realised the blood wouldn't stop, and we knew help wasn't going to come quickly, so my friend tied a shoelace around the wound. We felt like we were abandoned. They simply told us there is no help and no one will save you.
Gaza has run out of power. Food and medicine are next. The suffering on both sides will only get worse as this war intensifies. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Now, the conflict in the Middle East may be more than 2,000 miles away, but for both Jewish and Palestinian communities across the UK, it feels especially close to home. I'm joined now by Basma Golani, a British Palestinian whose brother is stuck in Gaza. She speaks to us from Manchester. Basma, thank you so much for coming on to the UK tonight to talk to us about what's happening to your family. Talk to us about what's happening to your brother. Have you heard from him?
My brother went to Palestine to visit my parents, and the assault started while he was 2 weeks into his visit, and he is now with my father in Gaza.
Have you had contact with him over the last 24 hours? Has he told you what is happening there, what conditions are like?
He has. We've had contact. I'm in touch with him on WhatsApp. The conditions are getting worse at the moment. There is a shortage in water, electricity, and there's ongoing bombing happening. And the Israelis have started using white phosphorus in the surrounding area that he's staying at. So he's had to move somewhere else. He assumed that the place he was at was safe, but it wasn't, so he's had to move somewhere else because they've started using white phosphorus.
Basma, this has all happened so quickly after the Hamas attack on Israel on Saturday, the escalation of what is happening, Gaza being cut off, electricity, water, food. What has your brother been telling you about what's been happening over the last few days, and how Palestinians are feeling in the Gaza Strip about what is happening right now?
So the question really is what brought us to here? Why are we here now? Why are they feeling this current frustration? This is not a new feeling to Palestinians. These are feelings we are very familiar with. We have been dealing with those feelings since 1948. This attack, this assault is not new to us. We've been suffering from assault over assault over assault over the past 2 decades, and the reason we're hearing about it now is because the Palestinians have reacted. So it's nothing new to us. This frustration that the Palestinians are feeling at the moment isn't new. It's no shock. It shouldn't be a shock. If the news was reporting properly, no one should be surprised that the Palestinians have reached this point. So back home, a lot of frustration, a lot of apprehension, worry. They don't know when the water is going to be coming back, when the electricity is going to be coming back. So as you can imagine, what would anyone do in that situation? So those are the general feelings are happening.
Yeah,
but siege is not new to us. We've been this
Basma,
2 decades now.
You say this isn't new, and we know that the history and what Palestinians have endured, particularly in the area we're looking at now in Gaza. But does this feel different? Israel are calling this a new war, and they have warned of dark days ahead. Israel have said they will be merciless in their retaliation for what happened at the weekend. Is there a feeling amongst Palestinians living in Gaza that this is going to be different? This is somehow going to be worse?
I take issue with the use of the word war. This is not a conflict. This is an occupation. This is This is an occupation. Palestinians have been occupied by the Israelis since 1948. And calling it a war is really a misrepresentation of what's happening. What's happened is the Palestinians are struggling people. They've been oppressed for decades, and now they are reacting. They are responding to decades of oppression and assaults by the Israelis. No, this is not new. It's going to be slightly worse possibly. I'm just saying in theory, but I don't think it's anything that we haven't dealt with before, and previous assaults by the Israelis have gone unreported because we hadn't responded. Just because we responded now, it is being reported on the news, but this has been ongoing for a very long time.
Basma, I was reflecting here in the studio last night on the programme with a British-Palestinian woman, Sarah Argo, who was saying that Palestinians are resilient. Like you said, they have been here before. There is a long history of this. With that in mind, how do you feel about your brother and your father, your parents being out there at the moment while this continues?
My general feeling at the moment is a disappointment. It's disappointment. I am British Palestinian. My kids are half English. Their father's English. I'm very disappointed because I can't look my kids in the eye and tell them they're proud of their government that's supporting a far right-wing Israeli government that attacks civilians and has been attacking and killing civilians and besieging them and breaking all kinds of international laws.
Well, the UK government has been condemning the attacks by Hamas on Israel that happened at the weekend. When you speak of it like that, are you feeling that in the UK the Palestinian community are perhaps not being as publicly supported in the main as the Jewish community? I think the UK government has been quite clear on its position.
100%. The UK government hasn't been supportive. They've expressed condemnation of Hamas. They have not expressed any support for the Palestinians. And any politician who expresses support for the Palestinians is marginalized, is cast out, is not heard from, and they're alienated. So yes, I am disappointed.
Yeah, you're disappointed, but it is also really important to point out to our viewers that the UK government has condemned Hamas, not the Palestinian people.
But it's not, the issue isn't Hamas, really. The issue is, why are we here now? Why are we here? What the bigger context, the occupation of the Palestinian people. It's the assaults have been happening from before Hamas were ever in power. What was the excuse then for assaults? Why was the British government still supporting those assaults? That is the question.
OK, Basma Galani, we really appreciate your time here on Sky News. Thank you so much for speaking to us about your brother and your parents who are in the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip completely cut off to electricity, food, water, people going in and out as this conflict continues. And just to reiterate, the UK government condemning the actions of Hamas. Hamas, of course, as we've been saying here on this programme, not to be conflated with the Palestinian people. Now, 17 British people are missing, feared dead in Israel. This follows the attacks that were launched by Hamas on Saturday. Today, it was confirmed that 26-year-old Jake Marlowe was among those killed during that attack. He'd been working as a security guard at the festival, which was hit by Hamas gunmen. He was originally recorded as missing, but his death was confirmed by the Israeli embassy in London earlier today. And earlier today, Buckingham Palace made its first comment since this war began, saying the King was appalled and condemned the barbaric acts of terrorism in Israel. It comes after the chief rabbi criticised those choosing not to describe Hamas as terrorists. Well, in a lengthy statement posted on X today, Sir Ephraim Mervis said it should be painfully obvious that there is no moral equivalence between those whose motive is to deliberately target innocent civilians in cold blood and those whose motive is to remove the threat of such murderers. The fact that this discussion is necessary at all is a clear sign that we are losing our moral compass and of the warped nature of the depths to which discourse on Israel has sunk. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock is here with me. Laura, the royal family and entering into the political fray. We know the history and we know that they don't get involved, but such is the human cost of what is unfolding in the Middle East on both sides, particularly at the weekend and the acts that were carried out by Hamas. It's probably no surprise that the king felt he had to come out at some point to say something.
And there was a question as to why it had taken so long and what was going to be said and how it was going to be said, because anything the king or indeed the palace says publicly, when it comes to these very sensitive issues, well, the government will have oversight. Words will be carefully chosen and really carefully chosen, particularly when it comes to a conflict as complex as the Middle East. Now, in the past, the king has spoken out quite publicly. He's spoken of his support, his sympathy for the Palestinian people. Today, no direct words from the king, but other ways. So we've had a phone call with the king and the Israeli president. We've had his spokesperson commenting on behalf of him. So you see a slightly different, a slightly more measured response. But if you look at some of the language being used, especially from the palace, today it has been unquestionably punchy.
We sing all together.
The king is no stranger to the troubled history of the Middle East. His trip in 2020 while Prince of Wales to Jerusalem and the West Bank, a landmark visit, laden with gestures of unity. It followed Prince William's historic trip months earlier. And although the late Queen never visited, these are important displays of international diplomacy. No formal statement from the king on the current conflict, but strong words from his spokesperson, saying His Majesty was appalled by and condemned the barbaric acts of terrorism. This is a situation His Majesty is extremely concerned about, and he has asked to be kept actively updated. At Buckingham Palace earlier, the king spoke to the Israeli president, offering sympathy and conveying his deep shock. The language is striking, and his support welcomed by Jewish leaders.
The statement even issued by the king today, who's also abhorred these acts of terrorism. Even the king has come out and he's said that, and he's done absolutely the right thing.
And similar sentiment from Kensington Palace. The Prince and Princess of Wales said to be profoundly distressed and utterly condemn the horrors inflicted by Hamas.
Free, free Palestine!
Across the UK, people have gathered with demonstrations and vigils from Manchester to Glasgow. Far from royal circles, but aware of the royal rhetoric.
Whenever something happens on the Palestinian side, it has to be condemned. Why is it not condemned on the other side?
We are such a wonderful democratic society with a fantastic king, and it's a message that's got to go across the world. He is absolutely right. Terrorism is terrorism, and that's it.
As head of state, the king is usually quick to respond to serious global events, but the fact it has taken 5 days is in itself significant. This delay expresses an acknowledgement within the palace of the sensitivities of this situation.
No official words from the king, but a very clear steer on the strength of feeling inside palace walls.
Laura, we're probably splitting hairs here, or are we? The fact that, you know, particularly in the age of social media, the Prince and Princess of Wales directly speak on social media. They put their initials at the end. But their statement was one step removed, wasn't it? It was a spokesperson putting out a statement on behalf of them, and the same for the king as well. And it relates back to what the chief rabbi said about how the discourse around Israel and conflict in the Middle East has got so warped. People are frightened to enter the discourse because of the backlash they may get if they get it wrong or it's taken a certain way.
It is difficult and it's divisive. And I think if you have certainly the king as head of state, as head of the nation, his role is one of unifying. And how do you do that when you have a conflict that is so divisive? When it comes to the Prince and Princess of Wales, they're very vocal usually on social media. So it was interesting to see their statement expressed through their spokesperson. There was a detachment there. And yet the sentiment within that statement, I think, felt very personal. And Prince William, certainly from his his personal visit there back in 2018, will have known and seen and met the leaders on both sides, political, religious leaders. He will be aware of the conflict, of the tension, and won't want to be getting it wrong. But I think it's very much speaking to this cautious approach by the government, who will have had oversight, I think, of both of those statements, what we've seen coming out of both palaces today. It speaks to a caution of not wanting to get it wrong, and perhaps a reflection of just how volatile the situation is at the moment.
OK, Laura, thank you. Laura Bundock there. And now communities across the country have been holding demonstrations and vigils over the last few days after this conflict in the Middle East broke out. In Manchester, police say 4 people have been arrested tonight at a pro-Palestinian demonstration. This is the statement we have from Greater Manchester Police. It says during events in Manchester city centre tonight, marking the Hamas-Israel conflict, 4 people were arrested on suspicion of breaching the peace. They were not arrested for supporting Palestine. The force draws a clear distinction between support for Palestine and support for the proscribed terrorist organisation Hamas. The suspects who were taken into police custody were arrested following an assessment that their actions had the potential to cause disorder at an otherwise peaceful event. Well, many parts of the UK have been holding vigils reflecting on the atrocities in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis has been at an Israeli vigil in Glasgow.
Well, this is a community here in Glasgow, like many others across the UK, across many parts of the world, reeling at the events of the last couple of days. And this is a vigil. Several hundred people here in Glasgow gathering for their moment to reflect on the atrocities of the last number of days as well. This is a country, a city too, remembering a loss of their own. Bernard Cowan, a man who grew up here in Glasgow, lived here in Glasgow, has relatives here in Glasgow, and is one of the Brits who have lost their lives in this war. We've also been hearing today from the wife of Scotland's First Minister, Nadia El Naka, whose parents are trapped in that part of the world and are fearing for their life. She is terrified of what may happen. Let's have a look and get a sense as to the scale of this. This is mirrored in many places across the country here. People stopping and reflecting, flags being waved here by members of the community, and just up here we can see some candles, a moment of quiet reflection for those who have lost their lives. There will be many people here, part of the Jewish community, who are thinking of relatives who have close friends and members of their own family who have suffered a loss. And that is front and centre here at this vigil here in Glasgow, and again is mirrored across the country.
Let's just bring you some breaking news. Officers from the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command are appealing tonight for anyone in the UK who has direct evidence related to the terrorist attacks in southern Israel to contact police. The attacks, as we have been covering, began on Saturday and continued into the following days. UK nationals are among those who were killed or are still missing. The Metropolitan Police say that this appeal is directed at anyone who may have already returned from Israel in the past few days and has footage or images of the terrorist attacks at the weekend. Still to come on the UK tonight, the moment a car park at Luton Airport was engulfed by a fireball. 1,200 vehicles are believed to have been damaged. And find out why climate change is making your beer taste worse. Plus, I'm going to speak to the coach of a Welsh junior football team to find out just how they ended up being sponsored by the rapper 50 Cent.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
There is now a mandatory evacuation for this street. For many people, Harvey is far from over.
Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque.
We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir.
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis. It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground.
How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
Welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here is what's coming up. Wild beavers are back in London for the first time in 4 centuries. A family have been released in Ealing to improve biodiversity.
The next stop is the Etihad campus, the home of the champions of England and the champions of Europe. Come on, City.
I think I know who it is because my producer told me, but do you recognise this familiar voice over Manchester's tram network announcements? Now, Sir Keir Starmer says even Rishi Sunak thinks that the Conservatives will lose the next general election. The Labour leader was speaking after his speech to the party conference yesterday, and he doubled down on his promises to tackle NHS waiting lists and the housing shortage. Sir Keir Starmer said his party have earned the right to be judged by voters. He was speaking to our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
How are you doing? The morning after a defining speech for Sir Keir Starmer, this man relaxed and relieved. Did you feel emotional?
Yes, of course. I feel very emotional about it.
What did you feel when you were doing the speech?
I felt proud of the hard work that the Labour Party has done in the last 4 years to change our party.
Did you feel exhilarated, nervous, relief? Like, what did you feel? You told me kind of messages. What did you feel?
Like an
I want to know what you felt.
An inner determination.
Determined to cut NHS waiting lists today, a new commitment. You talked about the last Labour government getting waiting times down to the lowest ever number of people waiting. My question to you is, can you promise voters now that you'll match that achievement of the last Labour government by the end of your first Labour term, should you win?
I am determined to do what the last Labour government did, which is to bring those waiting lists down.
But
our ambition...
But I just want to be really clear on this. Do you think you can get it down to, say, 2.3 million by the end of the next Parliament, should you win?
Yes, my ambition is to clear it.
Plans for government, but still questions about his judgment given who he wants backed. When you told voters in 2017 and 2019 that Jeremy Corbyn, a man who called Hamas friends, should be Prime Minister, did you say that because you had to, or did you actually believe it?
Well, look, I think in 2017 and 2019, the Labour Party lost its way. And that's why my first words as Labour leader, were, we will rip anti-Semitism out by its roots.
And I've said that that was not my question. My question was, did you mean it when you said Jeremy Corbyn should be Prime Minister?
Look, every Labour Party member and activist always wants a Labour government.
People judge you on this. People think he backed Jeremy Corbyn to be Labour leader, this guy. Should I vote for him? That's why I'm asking you.
I have invited...
Do you regret it?
I've invited the Jewish communities to judge me on my record, but we are a fundamentally different party to the party that fought the election in 2019.
Last week, the Prime Minister told me nobody wants an election right now. Is he right?
No, he's completely wrong about that. What he really meant was he's not happy to go to the electorate because he thinks he will lose. I think he said last week something that I agree with, which is that the last few years have been the wrong decisions and we need change. I say spot on. Let the country decide the change that it needs. That can be done through a general election.
There's no doubt this leader thinks it's his time, his task this week to prove Labour's a government in waiting. Job done in Liverpool, Labour's next task to convince the country there are brighter days ahead. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Liverpool.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. Tens of thousands of air passengers have been facing disruption all day after flights were suspended at Luton Airport because of a fire in the car park. Well, this was the moment a huge fireball exploded and engulfed the car park. 1,200 cars are believed to have been damaged in the fire. Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Service declared it a major incident and said more than 100 firefighters were at the scene. Well, this is how the airport car park looked this afternoon. Flights suspended after that fire, but they did resume at around 3 o'clock. 5 people were taken to hospital after suffering from smoke inhalation. A watchdog has warned that Wandsworth Prison in southwest London is unsafe and inhumane. The Independent Monitoring Board said years of underinvestment in the site, facilities and staff had led to an unsafe environment with violence continuing to rise. The watchdog warns that the problems at HMP Wandsworth reflect the failures of the prison system as a whole. This report was written before the alleged escape of Daniel Khalif from that prison just last month. Bad news if you like to enjoy a pint. A new study claims that the quality of beer is on a steady decline and the price is going up, all because of climate change. Well, researchers say that British drinkers should expect to pay more in the coming years for a pint, with the increase in agricultural droughts affecting the size and quality of hop yields. The study is suggesting that hop yields could fall by a third by 2050 across all European hop-growing regions, including here in Britain. Now, for the first time in 400 years, a family of wild beavers has taken up residence in London. The adult couple and their 3 kits have been released in wetlands in Ealing in a bid to improve biodiversity and reduce the risk of flooding in the area. Here's our science and technology editor, Tom Clark.
You can't know what a beaver's really thinking, but as first impressions go, it seems positive. This family of 5 is arriving in their new home in West London, drawing a crowd as the first beavers released into a properly urban area of Britain since their extinction by hunting in Elizabethan times.
They're able to transform the landscape and they provide ecosystem services. For example, they'll help this landscape hold more water and that will slow the flow and reduce flood risk locally. So we know Lower Greenford regularly suffers from flooding, so having beavers here will reduce that risk.
The project is also an example of how reintroduced beavers could be controlled. These are Asbo beavers, removed from Scotland after flooding a farmer's field. Perhaps the scrubland and culverts of the city will suit them better.
Well, this is a site the likes of which there hasn't been in the London Borough of Ealing for 400 years. A beaver swimming freely in an urban waterway like this.
But there's something the Ealing 5 are yet to discover.
These beavers, like all those reintroduced in England, aren't really free. There's a 1.8-kilometre fence all around this site. A government decision on allowing the release of beavers into the wild is a year overdue. To campaigners, another example of broken promises over wildlife.
All the little tweaking around the edges and the retrograde steps, they are doing nothing to help. We need step change, and sanctioning the proper, appropriate releases of beavers into the wild in this country would be a significant step change.
In a statement, DEFRA rejects such a criticism. Progress on biodiversity targets has been made, it said, and more would be announced by the end of the year. Ealing's newest residents have 2 months to settle before the site is reopened to the public. They can judge for themselves what benefits the beavers bring to the neighbourhood. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Coming up after the break here on the UK Tonight, we're going to be marking Baby Loss Awareness Week with the author Pippa Vosper, who lost her son Axel when she was 5 months pregnant. It's a very open and honest interview which some of you may find upsetting. So just to let you know that that's coming up. Also, UK airlines suspend flights to and from Israel. One plane got all the way to Tel Aviv today before being told to turn around and come back to Heathrow. We'll have more details. Welcome back to the UK Tonight. Now, our next interview is about something many of you may have experienced and will be upset by: baby loss. And if you think you don't know anyone affected by this, it's probably because they don't feel comfortable talking about it. The author, Pippa Vosper, lost her son Axel at 5 months pregnant. And to mark Baby Loss Awareness Week, I spoke to her about the need to talk openly and honestly about the loss of a baby, and why these conversations don't happen for fear of embarrassment or blame. The lack of conversation around baby loss can leave bereaved parents literally suffering in silence. A warning that my conversation with Pippa does involve very raw and sensitive detail about the death of Axel.
So when I lost my baby 5 months into pregnancy, I felt embarrassed. I thought, what are other people going to think about me? I thought I must have killed him. Something I did must have killed him. And none of these things are true. And until people actually began telling me, obstetrician gynecologists and friends and specialists said, you know, it's very difficult for you to actually kill your baby or be the cause of the loss of that pregnancy. There's so much shame and silence, and as you said, it's uncomfortable for people around you to speak about this loss. So by more and more people speaking up, it does just become one of those things that you can cope with more as the person who lost the baby, but also everyone surrounding that person is able to say, I know a little bit more about this experience and therefore won't say the clumsy things that are completely well-meaning but are incredibly hurtful a lot of the time to those parents that have lost the baby.
Talk to me about how you feel about the language that's used around baby loss. It's not called baby death, is it?
No.
There's the word miscarriage, which in your book you say doesn't even come close to what mothers actually go through.
Yeah, it's that thing about you can't blame anybody, because until it happened to me, I might have said things that weren't particularly comforting or appropriate too. But as you said, I'm glad you can get pregnant. You're young, you're healthy, you're in a relationship, or it's proof that you can carry children if you have one already. But these things are not helpful, and until you really begin to understand that, it's only then that people can really say the right thing. And I think starting with "I'm sorry that this happened to you," and just listening to the parents or those surrounding the parents who want to talk about this loss is a really good place to start, and crucial in allowing the parent to feel validated. Because when I lost my baby, I met him, he was a baby, and lots of people don't understandably understand that it wasn't just cells or a small mass. There's a baby that comes if it's later in pregnancy. And I felt very conscious of the fact that I was calling him my baby, and I was almost embarrassed to say my baby when the doctors were referring to him as a late miscarriage. So for me, it's baby loss all the way along, from the very moment you see the pregnancy line to full term. It is that whole thing about just speaking more openly. I wrote a first piece for British Vogue, and in that piece I said how much I loved kissing my cold baby's skin and how beautiful he was. And I think possibly until that point, nobody else had really said the descriptive way of saying how you give birth to babies that don't sadly survive.
You work through the grief, but losing a child is something you never move on from. It's something you live with. And again, it comes back to language, because so many families, when they refer to their children, they might have 2 living children and they have lost a child, and they refer to themselves as having 3 children. And you're very passionate about that. You don't want Axel written out of your family story.
No, I mean, it depends on the company. I mean, if I'm at a business dinner, then I maybe won't say I have 3 children, because the conversation, it's my choice not to put this into the conversation at that time. But in the majority of cases, I will say I have 2 living children and I have 1 child who passed away, I'm sorry. And if the other people are uncomfortable, then they're going to have to be uncomfortable for a minute, because I'm not going to discount that I had another beautiful son who died with me.
I just want to end our conversation by asking you what you would say to parents who may be going through this right now, because we're still at a point where so many people feel so alone and like nobody else has suffered pain like this, when the truth is there are so many more people that do. It's just they perhaps don't share it because they feel they can't.
I would say if you can find the energy within your grief to find a support group, or ask a friend to help you find a support group, or someone to talk to who understands pregnancy loss, because many people feel like I did, and you feel like a burden to talk to your partner too often about it, or your friend group. So if you can find somebody or a group that understands exactly what you're going through, this can be very, very helpful. I would say stay off of social media in the first few months after you have a pregnancy loss, because there is so much information. And I think in-person groups are the best way forward, when you can really connect with people or a person, and just speak openly and freely as you feel comfortable with friends and family, and just hope that they have the empathy and the knowledge to support you through what's happened.
Well, a huge thank you to Pippa. It's a conversation that can be so difficult, but it doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be. And it's thanks to mothers like Pippa, parents who talk so openly, that it tries to make it easier for all of us to talk about baby loss. Babies might be gone, but they shouldn't be forgotten. Now, British Airways and Virgin Atlantic have both suspended flights to and from Israel because of safety fears. Now, a BA flight to Israel was descending into Tel Aviv earlier this afternoon when the decision was made to turn around and head back to Heathrow. EasyJet and Wizz Air, they've also suspended their services between the UK and Israel. Our correspondent Rachel Venables is at Heathrow tonight. Rachel, given what we are seeing unfolding in the Middle East, this perhaps comes as no surprise. A lot of people may well think it should have happened sooner.
Exactly, and the decision by BA today and Virgin Atlantic as well comes after other airlines such as Lufthansa and EasyJet had already decided to stop flying to and from Israel. So I think for the passengers on board this flight, BA 165, which departed from Heathrow at just after 8 o'clock this morning, the news that they weren't going to make it to their final destination wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it has still been a very long, very stressful, very anxious day in the air for them. I mentioned the time they departed this morning. They're expecting to land at around 3 o'clock local time into Tel Aviv. Instead, the plane started its descent before the pilot noticed what we suspect were rockets flying around the airport. They seem to have done a quick abort before heading all the way back here to Heathrow. And as I mentioned, the people we've spoken to, travellers, journalists, families and the like, saying it has been a very long and exhausting day. Some of them, of course, just trying to get home. But as we've already mentioned, BA having now decided to cancel all flights for the foreseeable future in a statement saying that safety is always our highest priority.
Rachel, thank you. Let's bring you some breaking news now. The Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, the DCMS, has spoken to sports bodies across the UK tonight, encouraging them, we understand, to mark the attacks in Israel in line, they say, with previous events. Let's speak to our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, who is in Westminster for us tonight. Rob, what exactly do they mean by that key line, in line with previous events?
Well, the Wembley Arch has often been used as a symbol of solidarity. It's been lit up in the colours of the Ukrainian flag and indeed after attacks in Turkey, France and elsewhere. So that's why pressure has been building for the arch to be lit up in the blue and white of the Israeli flag to mark the more than 1,000 lives lost since the Hamas attacks on Israel on Saturday. The Labour leader Keir Starmer indeed today backed the arch being lit up in blue and white, but the FA has said nothing yet. What we understand is the Culture, Media and Sport Department have written to sports bodies today, and what they say in part in this letter is, in the light of the attacks in Israel, on behalf of the Secretary of State, we would encourage you to mark the events appropriately in line with previous event where sport has come together. So we are waiting to see just what will happen. We have had the Football Association president speaking today because Prince William, in his royal capacity, has talked of the tragic loss of life of Israelis and also about losses across the region. But now we wait for news from the FA ahead of Friday's game against Australia, but also the world bodies, FIFA and UEFA, have also been silent, unlike after previous incidents.
Rob, thank you. Rob Harris there with the update. Now, staying with football, Welsh football has had a little bit of stardust sprinkled on it in recent years, hasn't it? What with Hollywood actors Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney buying Wrexham AFC. But now, one of America's biggest rappers, 50 Cent, is getting in on the act. He is sponsoring an under-14s girls team in Cardiff. Well, joining me now is Richie Brown, head of the girls section and coach of the under-14s and under-17s girls teams at Rumney AFC. Richie, good evening to you.
Good evening.
How on earth did the rapper 50 Cent get involved in your team? Talk us through it.
Well, what it was, a parent of one of our players, he was working alongside 50 Cent whilst he was on tour in America. And whilst he was there, he had a bit of pressure from us back home to ask him to sponsor us. So he went ahead and did that. He asked him. And yeah, he agreed to it and bought us a nice brand new away kit.
Well, in line with, sporting interviews, let's talk through the deal. What are the girls getting from 50 Cent?
So every single player who's registered for the under-14s girls team have been given a brand new away kit. On top of that, we thought we'd be a little bit more cheeky. We went in for a second question. of sponsorship for tracksuits, and then he supplied all the tracksuits as well. So it was kind of a double win-win for us.
Richie, in line with the top sporting clubs going in there for the hard negotiation, quick question, did the girls know who 50 Cent was?
I think quite a few of them do know who he is. I'd probably say it's more to do with his acting career, though, rather than the music.
Well, they're now rediscovering his back catalogue on whatever streamer service they're on. Really good to speak to you. That is from Romney AFC, Richie Brown, head of the girls section. Great to have you on the UK Tonight. Thank you.